is think about what the vision of an OPO is, a vision of something, this kind of architecture. And it's something we kind of touched on here and there in all the videos. But that again, that is this architecture is in the book we call it a source code for an emerging culture. So this would be the vision, the very large vision of creating OPOs is looking at a better world and seeing an emerging culture. And so the way I look at it is in traditional society or current society, there's a sense in which where there's a whole series of constraints, and we talked about this in the previous video. And the widest constraint is the governance, right? So the government sets constraints. The government doesn't really set possibilities anymore. There's more of a sense that it's regulatory, it sets constraints, it has its own federal agenda. And within that, we have the financial system of investors and venture capital and grants and government. And there's a lot of pressure and constraints and lack of flexibility and fluidity between the government and the financial system. The financial system, then, the corporations are heavily now dependent upon the financial system. There's this whole critique of virtual production cycles. And the financial system has become something that has really constrained corporations. So we have a lot of responsibility to investors and venture capitalists and just kind of absentee shareholders. So this is the level of the corporation. And the corporation may have subsidiaries. And because the subsidiaries are not under this pressure, but the corporations, the parent corporations have, the parent corporations have to pass on this pressure to the subsidiaries. And of course, each subsidiary within each organization with its subsidiary then creates its architecture to be constrained by these pressures on and on and on and on until the individual in here can imagine something that's open and participatory. But there's all this contraction going into the daily and ordinary life of this individual or this team. So that seems to me to be the contraction of, let's say, a very mature late stage capitalist society with a representational government, not a participatory one. So this is a very big and broad stroke, but I think that we all feel this. The individual entrepreneur at this level feeling all this pressure is really doesn't really have the liberty to liberate the employee because there's all these other constraints that the employee is not directly involved in. So the whole system kind of works as a system of nested invariant structures. That's not, and what makes them invariant is the same as saying they're not responsive. So we don't see in here an opportunity for any synergistic participation. So what the OPO envisions in terms of an emerging culture, and we'll haven't gotten to it, but we look at the governance here, the endothermic governance in the center. It's as if instead of having the government or governance being this top-down constraint, it's a participatory governance. And so if you think of, let's say, the water, the ocean level, and this is the water level. And here's the larger culture or the larger society. Instead of government coming down and constraining, what we have is participation of many streams, right? All this little local participation that bubbles up and co-evolves a governance, right, inside an organization. And there are many of these, right? So there's many governance, many participatory organizations, many groups of people participating together, co-evolving the governance, the inside, right at the heart of this these organizations. And then the governance describes, because this, when we get to the governance, we'll see the governance describes, defines, and delineates what the performance zones are, the objectives and the values in the performance zones, and the objectives and the values in the network performance zones. And there's a process by which that evolves over time. So the governance makes possible the delineation of these core performance value zones, right? The governance is where we describe, define, and design the core performance value zones that create value inside the organization and wealth in the culture. And then what we have is the network value zones that start to bubble up. So this is like bubbling up, because the network performance value zones have an inside and this synergistic relationship to the outside. So they start to perform in the larger culture above this, let's say, water level. And as that synergistic participation happens, then it's as if this value that's created, right? So this organization value, I say, gets exported as wealth into the culture. And these extra organizational values like support, adaptation, access, incubation, they become part of the wealth of the culture. So I like to see these bubbles as if they start to rise up from the organization into the larger culture. And it's not just from one organization, but it's from many organizations, right? So it's a way for the locus of cultural transformation to come from inside the locus of production. And these open participatory organizations become the leading edge, supporting the export of wealth to the cultural commons. And eventually what happens is people become capable of enacting participatory governance. And that is the biggest wealth in the commons. The commons then becomes capable of enacting a participatory governance. So that's the larger vision of the OPO, and there's a lot of work to be done between now and this future vision, but I think it's exciting and can be really fun.